we arbitrate, and ultimately the arbitrator finds, well, it wasn't really discipline. The company exercised their discretion to deny the leave of absence, and they have a right to do that. We tried to simply get them to rehire him as a new hire. Company demonstrated that they had a policy that if you were involuntarily separated, they won't bring you back. Part of the problem was, it isn't that the company was bad people. I mean, you went to their website, they sent messages on Veterans Day to everybody. They said they had programs like the buddy system, but unless you specifically requested it, you didn't get it. Now, this guy ended up, by the time we had the arbitration, he hadn't had a drink in over a year. He had addressed his issues, and the real problem was that the company, I believe, made a business decision. They didn't want to take a chance. I mean, somebody said during the grievance procedure, suppose he does it again. They viewed not only the potential for medical costs, but if he beats somebody up in a bar, maybe something could happen in the workplace. And so, and we also filed, charges with the Division of Human Rights claiming that they thought he had perceived disability. They found no probable cause. Arbitrator found wasn't disciplined. They had a right to deny the leave of absence. And the union did everything they could, and we weren't able to do anything for that guy. So you can have all the programs you want, but unless there's really a commitment to take a chance, you can end up with a guy not really getting what he needed.
So it sounds like the arbitrator in that case, it was almost like a threshold issue that it was decided on, as opposed to really getting into the facts and maybe considering some of the mitigating circumstances.
Well, I mean, the language of the contract said that a voluntary leave of absence can be applied for, but it is completely discretionary. And we tried to show that in some other cases, that discretion had been exercised, and that given his situation, it should have been exercised in the same way. They made the claim they needed to fill that position. They had been burned previously, so the day after he went to jail, they hired somebody to fill his position.
Very similar to your story. We work on discharge upgrades as well as VA benefits. And so we see a lot of people come back from Afghanistan or Iraq, still in the service, and they commit misconduct like that. Drinking and driving, drinking and fighting, smoking marijuana and having a dirty drop. And they get discharged because of it. And on their DD-214, they may have a general discharge or another than honorable, and it can take drug abuse in the narrative reason. This is like a huge barrier for a lot of vets coming home, going to an employer, showing their DD-214, and who's going to hire a drug abuser? Could have been a one-time thing, and this is them self-medicating. And so we have those issues come up quite a bit, where they just feel like if they go to an employer, they either lie and tell them they weren't a veteran, or they tell them they're a veteran and then disclose this not so great looking paperwork and have to explain that. So this comes up in the military end of things as well as after service.
I just wanted to make mention that there actually are a couple legislative items, and this is for New York, obviously, but there was a bill that passed both of our houses. There's a free mobile app for veterans. I know everyone's at their phone on the table right now, so but there is supposed to be a mobile app for veterans. I don't know when it's going to be loaded, and I guess I'm not confirmed whether or not the governor signed this bill or not, but it's a depository, so to speak, for people to be able to identify resources in the state. And so that's one thing. And for business, I know that we did extend the Hire Veteran Tax Credit Program for private businesses until 2019.
Right, so in the public sector, I think there's some explicit preferential hiring provisions, and then in the private sector, it's, you know, the offering of an incentive,
Yeah.
right, is a way.
We have a bill right now that, you know, is asking for like the civil service exam fee to be waived, just something that is just a little something.
One
you know,
less barrier,
sometimes-
right?
Right. And I think, I had said before, and you can relate this to different industries, different situations, whether it's related to education, whatnot, you're talking about barriers to employment. So you're talking about a barrier if someone has PTSD, related to combat, or maybe not. You're talking about barriers to employment if you're having a downgrade on your paperwork. And, you know, what's interesting about that, I don't think I've ever had a job where I actually had to show my DD-214, but I suppose there's a way in which if you're getting a federal job or, you know, something with the government, they may, you know, be required to show that. But we had a conversation about this last week. You're an 18-year-old kid, you know, and this is your life. Now this is like your scarlet letter for your life, that you have this piece of paper that said something you did when you were a teenager is now going to have a barrier for you in employment. And maybe it's not a barrier to employment. Maybe you don't disclose forever. But it's always something that's going to be with you that you have made. You're immature, a childhood mistake. You had a fight. You did something that's going to follow you forever. So I think that we need to be a little more cognizant about, you know, some of the things that we're talking about from my perspective, that they are literally barriers to people having gainful employment for a lengthy period of time. And someone might be able to work 30 years, and then one day, you know, I know people who are Vietnam veterans, and they go through life, and there might be just a little something, and then it could just be that one thing one day, and you never know. And we're not just talking about something that happened in combat 2 weeks ago or 3 years ago.
Well, and that's through as and I would ask the managers in the room that if they've noticed, any lengthy manager throughout the years, when I was a young kid, you know, looking for applying for jobs, teenage years, it was on all job applications. Are you a veteran? What's your military status? When my father and my grandfather got out of the military, you know, they were proud. That was one thing they always took with them on every job interview. Says, I have an honorable discharge. Because if you had a dishonorable discharge, like, you know, when Hunter says, they were like, that's an instant rejection. Anybody had dishonorable discharge, it ruined you for your life. And it has changed throughout the years. I'm asking, I mean, do you see that? Do you not ask for military reference anymore? Do you not ask for, you know, DD-214, you know, or do the employers even care if there's a veteran status or not?
Yes, WestRock, we do ask. The reason for that too is, number one, just like you said, there's tax credits. So anytime that any company can get a tax break from the state or federal government, they're gonna jump all over it. From my experience, I always ask for the DD-214. I don't require that they give it to me, mainly because I know what to look for on the DD-214. So if I have a 19-year-old kid that's applying for a position, I look down and basically the bottom right-hand corner on Form 4, it basically says your reenlistment eligibility code. And all you have to do is Google, and it'll actually give you what the reasons why they were dismissed from the service. So if you have a 19-year-old kid that was kicked out because he had a drug use, those are all factors that you have to look at, and you actually talk about it. Say, hey, why did you leave the service? Hey, I'm just ready to get out, or hey, I left because of this, I made a mistake. And those are things that you can take into consideration when you're hiring. So just because somebody, this is just from my company, Pamela's, just because somebody left the service on a general discharge, we try to figure out why, because it could have been a one-time case, because there's zero tolerance. The military will kick you out quickly, because there's always somebody else that can step up and do that breach, so to speak. But once you sit down and you talk with them and find out what the reason was for it, then you have an understanding. Yeah, I made a mistake and this is what happened. But not all hiring is like that though. So it's just from my experience, because I'm on the hiring committee for my facility, that I ask those questions. So, but I do know that not everybody asks those questions.
Hang on to your seats, I wanna say something, this is coming from our, Sub-District Director of the USW. Keith, I'm surprised he raised that. He definitely gives the benefit of the doubt just in general hiring, in terms of the record. He is a firm believer, and his boss and my counterpart, Dave Gray, gives the benefit of a doubt. Here's, hold your seats, a little too much, because sometimes those ones he's given the benefit of the doubt have become royal pains in the asses for both sides. But at least on the veteran side, I commend him for his giving the benefit of the doubt.
But I'd like to bring that up though, too, though, is that some people get gun shy. So once you get burned and your job is threatened, that's very hard for me, and we've had this discussion. It's hard for me now to give a second chance to somebody that might have had an issue in the past, because now my job's at risk. So that's a hard pill to swallow. And we've had the discussion, it's gonna be very hard for me to give somebody a second chance, knowing that I've been burned already once, been burned hard, and my livelihood is at jeopardy if I were to give somebody and they were to all of a sudden become an issue. So that's just the reality of the world that we live in. So
We represent a lot of school districts. I would say for certain civil service employees, the question is asked by civil service and by the employer, and the intention being to protect the applicant or the employee. If it's what's known as a competitive class civil service position, where they have to take a test, there's veterans preference where they get extra points for being veterans. If it's non-competitive, civil service, like in a school district, might be a bus driver or a school nurse, they get additional protection from discipline or discharge. They're treated, they get the same rights that competitive class employees get, where if they're gonna be disciplined or discharged, regardless of what the collective bargaining agreement says, they get special due process because of that. So the question is asked in the public sector for those reasons, again, with the intention being to protect
Right, so in the public sector, we're getting compulsion from the law, from the legislator. Private sector, it's not as clear cut, and, maybe we're having to rely on labor and management to work together, relying on management to be open to these ideas and perhaps implement best practices, right? But there's really no, for the most part, legal compulsion in the private sector, right? That's kind of why we're here.
And listen, in fairness, coming from an old guy, bald and gray, and I'm guilty of this, I sometimes relate to the staff my frustration that this younger generation doesn't want to come to work, and it's a different, I started the union in 1977. The problem years ago was if an employer cut back on overtime, we had a revolt on our hands. Because the old timers, they worked every bit of overtime, and if you mess with their overtime, you had a war. Today, I gotta have my weekends, but, and I say that because I'm a pretty square shooter. In fairness, most of our returning combat veterans are young people. And I was painting all young people with the same brush. And in fairness, this group of soldier has experienced multiple combat deployments as no other soldier in history has ever had to face. And not all young people, especially the young returning combat vet, deserves to get painted by this old guy saying that this young generation just doesn't want to go to work. And I guess I had to be reminded of that by my own son's, living through my son's experience and saying, I could see if he got out of the service, he's active, where he could be painted with that brush because of his 4 combat tours, and I'm perpetrating it, his own father. But I do think that we need to address these issues, whether informally, legislatively. We ought to begin wanna say this. The USW in this area is willing to have further dialogue with any management group, with attorneys, on trying to develop best practice. We invite your input. We would like to draft some document. The document's non-enforceable, it's on a voluntary basis.